Okay, great. We are up and running. Why don't we get started by saying our blessing over Torah? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, ידעי, So it is such a delight to be with you. I feel like it's been a while since we've been together because of Passover and when I was away on vacation. So I'm so glad that we can study with one another today. And it is, of course, the 8th day of Passover for some of us. For some of us, we've had that first taste of chametz already and Passover is over. We're going to be focusing on this week's Haftarah portion, not in connection with Passover, but within connection to this Shabbat. So Parashat Shemini. And I was excited to bring in this particular Haftarah portion because I'm focusing on a woman who appears in the Haftarah that many of us may not have had a chance to study before. So before we even get started, I'm wondering, does anyone know who Michal is within our texts? So a new name, right?
She has something to do with David. She was in love with him. Was she married to him?
Yes.
She his wife?
Yes, she was.
Okay. And then he ditched her for Bathsheba? No. Yes?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we're not going into that part of the story, but yes.
Like real life, huh? Okay.
And there is a lot with Michal's story that we'll see is really kind of challenging. But I think it gives us a whole lot to talk about. So with that, let me bring you into our text sheet. Can everyone see this okay? Yes. Yeah, I can actually make it a little bigger. There's no reason not to. So we're focusing on 2 Samuel. That's what our portion is. And these first 10 verses, you will notice Michal is not mentioned at all. This is to give some context as to what is going on at this point in the story. We remember that Saul had been king over Israel and that David came after him. And so some of that relationship is going to be really, really important here. Does anyone want to read these first few verses?
I can.
Thank you, Irv.
David again assembled all the picked men of Israel, 30,000 strong. And David and all the troops that were with him set out from Baalin of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, to which the name was attached, the name Lord of Hosts, enthroned on the cherubim. They loaded the ark of God onto a new cart and conveyed it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, Uzzah and Ahio, guided the new cart.
So I'm going to stop you right there just for a second, Irv. And sorry, there are so many names and stuff that's thrown into this portion. I know there's a whole lot of them. Just giving a little bit of context to what Irv just read. We know that as a people, we did not yet have a temple, right? It is David who ends up building the temple where the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God, will be placed. Does anyone remember what the Ark of God has inside of it?
And the tablets.
Yeah, exactly. So this is pretty sacred right here. Yeah, Jessica, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, it also had like beams of light and things came out and killed all the Nazis. In okay. Raiders.
But
Raiders.
I don't know that this one quite had that, but we see like enthroned are the cherubim, which we talked about before, as basically being these kind of angelic sculptures on the top of the ark, right? So it's really it has such ornamental kind of beauty that's brought to it, but what's inside is really the holiest things that we have as a people. So because we had no temple, and these things had been kept in a tabernacle, which is this portable sanctuary, didn't fully have a home yet. So that's the context.
These are not Aaron's sons, right? Who's in the island?
So Uzzah, Aaron is way earlier than this.
Oh, is it?
Right?
Okay.
That
so
time period is completely separate.
Okay, but they died touching this thing, and it's the same thing, right?
Well, and that's a really good point, right? Nadav and Abihu is who you're talking about. And they're actually in this week's Torah portion.
Okay.
They offer a strange fire to God and they're consumed by that fire.
Right.
So you're already kind of pointing out some parallels.
Okay. I was just a little confused. They conveyed it from Abinadab's house on the hill, who's walking alongside the Ark of God, and Ohio walking in front of the Ark. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord to the sound of all kinds of cypress wood instruments, with lyres, harps, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. Sounds like a rock band.
Yeah.
When they came to the threshing floor of Nakon, Uzzah reached out for the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. The Lord was incensed. Incensed, yeah. And God struck him down on the spot for his indiscretion. That's the part I remember. And he died there beside the ark of God. David was distressed because the Lord had inflicted a breach upon Uzzah, and that place was named Perez Uzzah, and it still is called. David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, "How can I let the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David would not bring the ark of the Lord to his place in the city of David. Instead, David diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of the Gittite.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Herb. So one thing you've already pointed out here is this parallel of the story, that here is Uzzah who reaches out for the ark of God and grasp it. And why does he grasp it? Well, some of the texts say because it was starting to slip. So he didn't want it to fall down, but he went and he grasped it and he touched it, and he died there because he did that for his indiscretion. And we have a parallel in this week's Torah portion with Nadav and Abihu when, they offer this great sacrifice to God because the tabernacle has been created. They offer this offering, and what happens? Nadav and Abihu end up offering an additional offering because they're so excited, and they're killed on the spot as well. Yeah, Jessica, please.
Back in verse 3, it says they put the ark on a new cart. They, meaning those three, I guess, including Uzzah. And so he's already touched it. So I don't understand. This seems like God overreacted big time.
Yeah, and you can make the same argument about Nadav and Abihu also. Why should they be killed? Because they offered a sacrifice to God, because they offered Esh Zerah, strange fire.
I'm sure they had a procedure for moving it that didn't allow for touching it. I'm sure they had it's, we had a temple in Orange County, where we rented space in a church, and we used to have to move the ark down the length of the synagogue and pick it up and put it on a dais or a table of support, and that's what this brings my memory to me. And it was kind of a sacred thing, and it was had a special feeling about it. Anyway.
Yeah, the Torah
Yeah.
is super, super specific about who can touch what and who is able to handle certain materials. Like if we look at actually Parashat Naso, that's coming up in a few weeks from now, right? It says, okay, here are all the Levites, here are all of the priests, there are different groups, they're each in charge of their own specific things. And if they touch something that's not theirs, that's a big no-no. That's a real issue. So it is like here we're not told who the they is or what the procedure is. But it would not surprise me if the procedure was such that Uzzah was not actually allowed to touch it.
Again, he couldn't touch it again because he already touched it.
Well,
We don't know. We
No,
actually don't know if he did.
like we had handles on the thing, so I would read it that they didn't touch it, that there was a process for moving it that did not involve touching. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to me, as you're bringing up, and it's conflicting.
Yeah, Jay.
The other part that in this that really hit me a little bit was verse 5. We want David and all the house of Israel dancing before Adonai to the sounds of all the instruments. I keep on thinking of Psalm 100. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing. And the second thing is I'm bothered just like everybody else about Uzzah. Because the way I read this, Uzzah reached out for the ark and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. So he was trying to keep the ark up.
Yes.
At least that's what the text is showing to me. I'm sure there's probably some midrash or something that maybe clears that up a little bit. And it just seems like all of a sudden you're just struck down for indiscretion. And to me, there's no indiscretion. You're helping to save something that's important. And what I usually tell my students when we talk about something like this is the importance of intention, the intention of why we're doing something. And it could be that he was trying to make himself look good by saving it and make himself like a hotch. I don't know. I'm just thinking a little outside the box a little bit, but there's got to be something why Uzzah is just shot down and killed, because otherwise it just makes no sense.
So
Yeah. Go ahead,
I
Rabbi Catherine.
wonder if this is the difference between the predictable and the unpredictable of what happens. It's predictable if you're going to move this. You're going to have some people are going to have to put it on something someplace, and it is the expected and therefore not expected, it's also respected for that reason. And in both of the things we're talking about, there is a thing you're supposed to do, a time and a place and a way you're supposed to do it. And both with the two sons and with this person, what they did was unexpected, and was really kind of frightening is it's such a fast reaction against them.
Absolutely true. But the portion doesn't even linger on what happened to Uzzah. Our Torah portion does linger on what happened to Nadim and Abihu a little bit, but here it just goes on. It's not about Uzzah at all. It's just
Right.
moves straight on to David and his reaction, which is very similar to ours, right? Like he's distressed. How could this possibly have happened to Uzzah? And he says he's afraid of God And he's also afraid to be in possession of the ark because what if something happens and he feels like he has to touch it for some reason to protect it, and then he's killed on the spot?
Isn't David dancing in front of the ark at this point? Isn't that what's happening?
Yeah, so
I-
there's a little bit of dancing right here, and we're going to see a whole lot more dancing that's coming up shortly.
I guess God likes dancing.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about that dancing piece. Anything else here? Is there anyone I'm missing? Okay, then let's move on a little bit. Okay, so David, he's building this temple. He's building the city of David, and he is not ready for the ark of God to come into the tabernacle because of what just happened to Uzzah. So let's read on and see what happens from there. Would anyone like to read this text?
I will.
Thank you, Jessica.
The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole household. It was reported to King David, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's house and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." Thereupon David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David, amid rejoicing. When the bearers of the ark of the Lord had moved forward 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David whirled with all his might before the Lord. David was girt with a linen ephod. Thus David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with blasts of the horn. As the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him for it.
Okay. So obviously there's a lot at the very end here, and I bolded this verse for a reason. Are there any questions about anything or any comments about anything leading up to the end here?
Yeah, I have one. I don't know if it's, well, so it says that the Lord blessed Obed-Edom, and then that was repeated again when David was told that the Lord had blessed Obed-Edom. So there must be something important about that blessing, because it was repeated again to David, and they report that in the Haftarah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just things that are repeated are always supposed to be important.
Yeah. So what do you think that importance is based on looking at this?
Well, I think it might have changed David's mind about having the ark by him instead of by the other guy, because then he thought maybe he could get blessed. I don't, maybe not, but it must have shown that God was in a better mood than he was 3 months before.
Yeah, certainly.
David wanted part of the action. Things were going good for the keeper of the ark. He wanted to see what it would bring to his efforts.
Yeah, I mean, the intention had been for the ark of God to come into the city of David, and there was a brief hiatus before that could happen because of what happened to poor Uzzah over there. So this definitely was a shift. Yeah, go ahead, Rabbi Catherine.
So does this say that who put the ark in the house of Obed-Edom? I don't remember, and I can't see that piece. So it was reported.
Yeah, that was actually up a little bit more. Let's see.
David did, didn't he?
It had been, let me just go back to that verse.
Yeah, it kind of looks like David is intimidated.
Yes.
Yeah, down here, David diverted it.
David diverted it, yeah.
Verse 10.
He just ordered it.
Yeah.
He ordered it to go there. He wasn't going to touch it. He was going to let somebody else take care of it.
Well, the priests that were carrying it probably took it, right?
Yeah.
this says,
It just confirms to me that there's a protocol in handling this.
yeah. Yeah, it says David is the person who placed it there. David diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. Maybe.
I interpret that as that he directed it to take place. He was still afraid of it.
Yeah.
But he put it in the house of somebody else. Somebody else is doing this. And that turns out to be a really, really good thing. God's happy with this guy.
Yeah.
Right. And David saw this. He said, well, it must be cool. Okay, we'll go get it and put it where we want it now.
I guess God's not going to strike out at me. It's going real well over here. And
Yeah.
give it another shot.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so little information we're given about Uzzah and why this happens, right? But as they're moving toward this tabernacle, like when they're wandering in the desert, there's a protocol of how everything is held and how everything is taken. And now if all of a sudden there's going to be a permanent place in which the ark can be, there could be a thought, okay, well, that was then, this is now. Now there's not the protocol that there needs to be, right? So some of the rabbis argue that the reason Uzzah is given this really, really harsh kind of punishment here is to solidify that no, there are procedures and things need to be done right. And having a permanent place does not change the fact that there are procedures. And something Uzzah did was in breach of the procedures, whether his intentions were positive or not.
Maybe he reached out rather than being told.
Yeah.
He saw something, let me fix that. And no, it should have come from somebody else. Or he should have said, hey.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know exactly what it was because the Torah doesn't tell us. There's just midrashim. But we know there was something about how he did it that was not in line with the way that it should have been done, which is incredibly vague, but it's what it is. We have the same thing in the Torah portion, right? They offer us foreign fire. What does that even mean, right? What was so wrong there? All we can do is kind of speculate based on very little text. So let's move to this last part here. Okay, David is dancing. He's whirling with all his might, right? He is leaping and whirling before God. Why do you think David is leaping and whirling? And why do you think Michal is despising him for doing so?
How long is this, when this is written, how long has it been since Saul was killed and David became the king?
That is a phenomenal question that I do not have the answer to. I'd have to look that up. Sorry, I just don't know.
I think she despised him for a lot of other things before that. This was just the most recent one. And very public. I mean, okay. What is this? Yeah, they make sure to let you know that David was girt with a linen ephod. So he's not going to disclose anything that should not be seen when he's dancing and cavorting.
But he's not dressed in the majesty of a king, and he's not walking with the gravitas of a king. He's dancing joyously before the Lord. So maybe she felt there was a lack of modesty and restraint. And there are servants and slaves around when this is all going on. And where was that joy when he met up with her again? I mean, who knows what's going on in her mind?
We're reminded that she is a king's daughter.
Yeah.
That puts her in a certain place mentally, I think.
Yeah, she is. And what all of you just said is so very much reflected by what the different rabbinic responses to this are. So I'm just going to walk us through some of these quickly, right? Radak gave a commentary saying, and David danced before God with all of his might. He danced with all of his strength and concentration, and Yonatan translated it as praised. So what is Radak getting across here about David's dancing?
He's euphoric about what's happening.
Yeah.
He's creating this wonderful place, and he's now got the ark coming, and he's just euphoric. And I think all religions in their primitive form had a lot of dancing, and any of the studies I've ever done, dancing is always part of the joy and the ritual and the and raising this feeling that it's almost it's when you get into a zone or you get into this feeling that overcomes you. I think it's the hysteria that comes with this religious feeling.
It's ecstatic Judaism is what it is right here, right? He's losing himself in his excitement because at long last, this Ark of the Covenant is finally making its way to its permanent home. He is over the moon. And Radak is saying that this is praising God. This is a form of prayer to God, moving his body in this kind of a way. That's a very positive thing, right?
Yes.
But Michal really does not think so. So he wants to read this text also by Radak.
I will.
Thank you, Misty.
And she despised him in her heart. When she saw him from the window, she despised him in her heart because she thought it was not honorable for the king to behave in the manner of the common people. Even before the ark and afterwards, when he went to his house, she said directly, "What was honor today? Why is David dancing? Is his behavior befitting a king? Why does Michal think it is not?"
Okay, so essentially, right, it's exactly what you had said before. Michal and also maybe it was Jessica who said that she was the daughter of a king. And the way in which Saul acted was with gravitas, was like with a certain kind of demeanor and decorum, especially in front of his people. And here, the way that David's acting is really not that. It is something entirely different.
Is Michal also Jewish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's Saul's daughter.
Is she one of the, as I recall, David had a lot of wives, and some of them were not real happy about it and were coerced into it. Is she one of those wives? Or is she's the king's daughter and the king gives a daughter to a king because we got to keep royalty up in this high level together?
So really, really good question. And I have some text talking about exactly that. So let's talk about the relationship between Michal and David and how that came to be. Okay. There's a few different texts here that are really important. Now, this is from 1 Samuel. So this is before all of this stuff. David went out with his men and killed 200 Philistines. David brought their foreskins and they were counted for the king that he might become the king's son-in-law. So basically that was the bride price. Saul then gave him his daughter, Michal, in marriage. When Saul realized that God was with David and that Michal, daughter of Saul, loved him, Saul grew more afraid of David, and Saul was David's enemy ever after. So there is a lot going on here, right? David married Michal. Saul gave her away, but there was no love lost between Saul and David.
Yeah, that's true.
Jealous of his victory over the Philistines.
Yeah, this is kind of a weird piece, is the foreskins being like the bride price. It's kind of an odd piece in there, but It's there nonetheless. There's one other piece that speaks more directly to your question in this text that I want to get to, but Misty, go ahead first.
What I was going to say is, as the story of Saul and David moves forward, she helps him escape from her father.
Yes, we're getting there.
Oh,
We're getting there.
Because he doesn't come back and rescue her or save her or anything, and she gets given off to the next guy. So I would think there's a lot of anger and resentment there.
There are so many dimensions to this, and we're going to get to that text in a second. But before we do, I just want to bring this one in. So Naomi Harris Rosenblatt, this is kind of Midrash and her exegesis of the text, writes, Michal, King Saul's younger daughter, achieves a rare distinction. The Bible says, now Michal, daughter of Saul, had fallen in love with David. This is the only time the Bible notes that a woman has fallen in love. Now it's the only time that it says that directly, right? In the story of Rebecca and Isaac, Rebecca falls off her camel, right? When he sees, so like there clearly are emotions that are felt in other parts in the Torah, but this is the only time directly this is said. The wording Michal's daughter of Saul suggests that her feelings influence the choice of her husband because of her privileged position as a princess. Whereas with most marriages at that time, the woman's personal feelings were rarely taken into account. The Bible is mute, however, about David's feelings for Michal, either because he had not chosen to express them or because a commentator's feelings were not important, or commoner's feelings were not important. We are left with a vague impression that something is off balance in this relationship. So it adds an interesting component.
She married a goat herder.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of unusual within our text, isn't it? So how does this change how you view the story so far, understanding this piece about David and Michal's relationship?
Well, I'm tempted to look into it. Is it Michal as a princess, and it sounds like a very valued one, and that her father would even consider her saying who she wanted to marry is extremely unusual. And maybe she just got annoyed because it's not going the way she wants, and she's always had things the way she wants, and that there's a piece of that in there, that she herself, especially since there's so much about a woman, that in itself is unusual. So, and I'm wondering if she was really spoiled and then she got annoyed and her father backed it.
Yeah, Misty, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think she's like a woman. I feel like she's a woman who's been jilted. And, David, we never hear that David loves her. And we know he's overwhelmed with lust for Bathsheba, but you don't hear about any of that from Michal. He doesn't come back, but she helps him escape with his life out the window. And now David's killed her father and claimed her back from the other husband, who we know did love her, because it talks about that. When David took her away. And not only that, but her and David never have a child. So he probably never touched her again after he claimed her back, and it was a power move. So she's ignored, she's jilted. I mean, there's a lot of emotions that I can imagine that she's experienced that would cause a level of angst and hostility and resentment and all those feelings that she's watching this guy who she can't seem to get into bed with dancing half naked in front of everybody else. So
exactly.
So there's so many different layers to this. And Misty, you've brought up this text a couple times, so let's look at this together. This is when Saul was alive, of course, right? And David's life is being threatened. So it says, Saul sent messengers to David's home to keep watch on him and to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, told him, unless you run for your life tonight, you'll be killed tomorrow. Michal let David down from the window, and he escaped and fled. Michal then took the household idol, laid it on the bed, and covered it with a cloth. And as its head, she put a net of goat's hair. Saul sent messengers to seize David, but she said, he is sick. Saul, however, sent back the messengers to see David for themselves. Bring him up to me in the bed, he ordered, that he may be put to death. When the messengers came, they found the household idol in the bed with a net of goat hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, why did you play that trick on me and let my enemy get away safely? Because, Michal answered Saul, he said to me, help me get away or I'll kill you. Now, this last line, it's important to understand.
Oh.
He said nothing of the sort. This is a lie that Michal is telling right here.
So she's playing both ends against the middle for her own benefit, or whatever her own desires are here.
Well, I mean, she had to say something, otherwise Saul could have. killed
True.
her For, I mean. So,
She's in a pretty rough spot here.
yeah, so. I mean, the only thing that could save her is that, I was held hostage, otherwise he was gonna kill me, basically.
Yeah.
But she loved him.
She also didn't get away with him. Like, they didn't leave together.
No,
And maybe
Right.
that couldn't have happened. Who knows?
I thought somebody thought one of you said that Michal said to Saul, David, said, help me get away or I killed you. I thought somebody said that David didn't really say that.
Right.
How, we only have Michal's point of view, or is there something else later?
Well, this story, yeah, I mean, this is the second time this story is recounted. So we have like conversations between Michal and David, and this was not a part of those. So the rabbis say, no, this was actually a lie that she told right here.
Oh. Wow. So who do we believe? Huh?
I mean, it could be that she's simply trying to save herself in this moment. That was a really tough spot, but it's true. David does not come back to look after her. So we see that there's some real challenges in Michal and Saul's relationship, clearly, right? So let's keep all of that in mind as we continue through the text a little bit more. Yeah, sorry. Did someone want to say something? Okay, maybe I'm hearing things. Let's go back to the text then. Would anyone like to read this piece here?
Sure.
Thank you, Rabbi Catherine.
They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it up in its place inside the tent, which David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and offerings of well-being before the Lord. When David finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and the offerings of well-being, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. And he distributed among all the people, the entire multitude of Israel, man and woman alike, to each a loaf of bread, a cake made in a pan, and a raisin cake. Then all the people left for their homes. David went home to greet his household, and Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, did the king of Israel do himself honor today, exposing himself today in the sight of slave girls of his subjects, as one of the riffraff might expose himself?
Okay, so clearly Michal is using a little bit of sarcasm here, right? This is not a kind statement being said to Saul. We can see that. Anything else from this text kind of strike you and what happens here? So conversation's about to get a little bit feistier.
Well, so David is acting in the position of a priest, right? As he's blessing the people and he's distributing.
Oh.
No, he's not a priest, he's a king.
He's a king, but
So
would kings bless the people and make burnt offerings? I mean, a lot of his actions sort of reflect some of the things the priest would also do, correct?
That's true. That's true. And it's always hard when you're talking about a king to figure out, like, what did he himself actually do and what did he direct to be done?
I think her problem is that she thought he got down at the level where people were acting wild. He was really, he's just in the moment, enjoying it, and enjoying the people, and saying, look, here's what we got now. I built the city and I put the ark here. I'm thrilled to death that I've done that for you. I'm dancing with you, enjoy. She's got her nose out of joint because whatever palace intrigue has got her entwined there. He obviously has feelings that are stirring up the anti what's happening. She just wants to make a meal of it.
Yeah, I mean, think of it this way too. This is a society that does not value females.
Right.
And we're going to go more into all of this.
Yes.
So it is Michal, not David, who has the royal bloodline, right?
That's true.
And if Michal had been in the position of leadership, her response to all of these things would have been different. Michal is resenting David for not leading in the way that she would have led if she was able to.
And her son would be the person who would be the next king.
Yes, if she had sons. We're going to get there too.
If she had them.
Yeah, and that's another piece that we need to talk about because there's something interesting there too.
That's
but
a
what
lot
happens,
of bread.
that is a lot of
bread and cake.
And perhaps this is why we don't usually read this during Passover. Instead, we wait until right after.
Could be.
Okay, so there's going to be a response, and this is a conversation now between David and Michal. So Michal said, oh, you acted in a way that was not really befitting a king. And David responds, it was before the Eternal who chose me instead of your father and all of his family and appointed me ruler over the Eternal's people Israel. I will dance before God and dishonor myself even more and be low in my own esteem. But among the slave girls that you speak of, I will be honored. So what is David kind of doing here?
Well, he's rubbing her face in the fact that her father lost and he won and he's now king. And
Yeah.
father's dead. So you owe me your obedience and respect. And
how do you think Michal's going to respond to that one?
I doubt she's going to be happy.
Yeah.
She is certainly not happy. So, but what happens is we're not going through this entire Haftarah. I'm only including one last verse in the Haftarah, which is the last time the Michal is mentioned here. The last verse is, so to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children. That's how it ends, which is kind of interesting in its own right. Okay, so when we look at that and we look at David's last word here, I'm king and you should obey and listen to me and honor me. And then the response right after, to her dying day, Michal had no children. It kind of reads like the reason Michal had no children is because she was not obedient and respectful of her husband as she should have been. Right? Which through modern eyes is a little bit challenging, isn't it?
And
but
I think David is saying, look, if God would want to be different, he'd have kept Saul alive, and I wouldn't be king, and you'd still be the princess. I'd be whatever until later in the story. But the story is, I'm king.
Right.
I'm here, and I have everything that goes along with it.
It also,
and it's like, you looked for me. I didn't look for you.
Yeah. Oh, also, I'm pointing out, Brian wrote into the chat that David was saying his actions will make him popular with lower elements of society, that he's like a leader of the people. So yeah, that's a really, really good point that he's bringing in there.
But it also shows a mean streak in the character of David. I mean, I think because, you know, this woman was with a man that loved her dearly. He could have let her go back to that husband, but instead, pretty much he kept her prisoner for the rest of her life, isolated and alone among all those women, because I don't think he ever visited her among his many women in the harem. It is, you know, that implication that she had no children of her own.
Right. Or that she was just made barren because of her actions, because that was seen as a punishment. Yeah, we really don't know. We just have to kind of speculate here. So the Talmud in Sanhedrin 21 basically says she didn't have children. Why? Because this was her due for despising David. This was her punishment.
That was obviously written by a man.
Anything in the Talmud really was. Yes, certainly. But here's something written by a woman. Okay, so Rabbi Julie Wolkoff wrote in the Woman's Haftarah commentary, and I'm bringing in a couple of texts from there because it was a beautiful article that she wrote. The verse itself is not pejorative. It does not say that Michal is being punished. It merely makes a statement of fact. Michal never had children. How we choose to view her childlessness is up to us. One of the significant characteristics of Michal is that the text regularly seeks to place her in a definable role based on who she is in relationship to the men in her life. Michal's name occurs 18 times in the Bible. 10 times she is described as the daughter of Saul, twice as David's wife, and once as both. There are only 5 instances in which one of these phrases is not appended to her name, yet in each of those cases, it is clear which relationship role she plays. Despite all of this, the text fails to decisively connect her to either man. The most telling example is found in 1 Samuel 25:44, where we read that Saul has given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to another man. Michal is both Saul's daughter and David's wife. She cannot be neatly placed into either category. So here we have this challenging position where she is a whole person who is kind of being put in this role. And there's this piece of her never having children. It might have nothing to do with the fact that she despised David. Okay, so there's one other text I want to bring in because we already brought up the idea that she actually didn't have children, right? And yet there are some contradictory texts to that end. So in 2 Samuel 21, it says, the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth. It's a lot easier to read in the Hebrew. The 2 sons that Rizpah, daughter of Ahab, bore to Saul, and the 5 sons that Merav, daughter of Saul, bore to Adriel, son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. So if we look here at the text, you'll notice it says Michal. So it says that the 5 sons of Michal, right? As if Michal had 5 sons, but in the English, we see Merav, Michal's sister. So this text in Samuel is actually not talking about Merav's children. It is talking about Michal having 5 sons. And so the rabbis grapple with that. Wait, we said that she had no children. How could it then say that she has 5 sons? And the answer they come up with is why Merav is written as a translation here, even though it is not in the text. And essentially, this is also in Sanhedrin. The Gemara asked, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, as well, isn't it written, and the 5 sons of Michal, daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel? Rabbi Yoshua ben Korha could have said to you to understand it this way. And did Michal give birth to these children? But didn't Merav give birth to them for Adriel? Rather, Merav gave birth to them and died, and Michal raised them in her house. Therefore, the children were called by her name to teach you that with regard to anyone who raises an orphan in the house, the verb ascribes him credit as if he gave birth to them. So this says that Michal actually did not give birth to any children, but she did raise 5 children. And so again, we see that Michal is kind of in her own category in a lot of different ways. I'm just going to walk us through the last couple of texts here. I do not have a whole lot more. So this is another text from the Talmud. Sorry, Jessica, do you want to say something first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that all this debate is over whether she had children, which was woman's defining act in her life, not whether she was the daughter of a king or the wife of a king or anything else she may have done, but whether she had children.
Yes, and that's so important. And we're going to get back to that in a second. And there is one other out of the box thing that I think is also important to throw in here first, which is the fact that Michal, daughter of Saul, wore tefillin. Does everyone know what tefillin are?
Yeah, but how do they know she wore them?
Because the text says so.
Yeah, Rabbi Catherine, come on.
All righty. All righty. Yes, ma'am.
Right there.
Oh, in a couple of places it says that. That tefillin, if you remember, those are kind of the phylacteries. Those are, there's 2 different boxes, one that one wears on one's head, one that one wears on one's arm. Inside is the text essentially of the Shema V'Ahavta prayer. And it is something that is usually not worn by women, right? It is generally worn by men only. Mm-hmm. And so here the text is saying that Michal wore tefillin, and you can see there's 2 different texts here that say that, right? One from the Talmud Bavli and one from the Talmud Yerushalmi. So these are different Talmuds, different rabbinic kind of discussions, but in 2 different houses of study, 2 different locations. Both of them say Michal wore tefillin, and the sages did not protest against her behavior. They were okay with her wearing tefillin. So then what this goes back to is really the role of a woman and how she falls in society. And going back to this very last text in this text study, to Rabbi Julie Wolkoff's kind of commentary, when we look at the wider context of Michal's life, it does not seem a tragedy at all. We see a woman who is not confined by people's expectations, but rather self-defined. She loves the man she marries, even as the text makes it clear that her father would have preferred anyone other than David. She saves David's life through lies and trickery at the expense of her relationship with her father. Although given to a second man in marriage, she returns to David, apparently untouched. She has a vision of how a king should act, and she stands by her belief, even though it means the end of her marriage. Rather than living the barren life implied by the words, she had no child until her dying day, she has a life filled with family and productivity. Should we pity Michal? It is easy to look back on our lives and say what we should have done. It is more difficult to say the right thing or to make the right move at the moment. Michal does a remarkable job dealing with the circumstances life hands her. She does not become bitter about roles that do not fit her. Instead, she moves forward and creates herself anew as an adoptive mother and a teacher to future generations. She is not constrained by a tradition that does not allow women to use tefillin. She makes the choice to wear them, and the text supports her choice.
Well,
so Michal really is a really interesting character, isn't she? Yeah, Jay, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the first thing I was gonna say is she's the ultimate feminist and a perfect role model for what liberal Judaism has became in finding ways to make the rituals work for them. And I know we felt bad for her at first because she felt like she was the unloved one, but she was able to find ways of making her life without having children.
Yeah.
Or having children differently. The raising of 5 children, your sister, and you're the, the queen with a not particularly supportive mate. It's like, yeah,
say the
that
least.
totally flips it for me, for her. I mean, David, he's such when I read the entire stuff on David in the Torah and the Haftarah and all that, I said, I never would have named my son David if I'd read this whole thing.
Yeah, Sharon, go ahead, please.
The last piece you read strikes me as totally inappropriate. You cannot take history and do that to it. The woman's role simply was not what has been described in that last thing you read. And what she was doing was so counterculture that we cannot excuse it in modern terms.
So what do you mean? Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, the point is made that she was the original feminist. Well, in her day, she was not being feminist at all. She was simply being difficult.
But don't you need to be difficult in order to be countercultural? Like in order to move change?
I think she was 1,000 years ahead of where change was going to be made.
And yet the rabbis were okay with her using tefillin.
Yes, and only male rabbis.
Yes.
Of course. I think they were afraid of her too.
Well, that definitely could have been.
I think the fact that her name is in the Bible is huge, and that it's repeated so many times.
Yes,
because
very
it has affected change
point.
over generations and generations and generations.
Yeah.
Thousands of years later, here we are reading this, and look at our commentary. So, she was a woman of significance back then, and she still is today. A trailblazer in many different ways. So, good for her.
Yeah, but it was not easy, certainly.
No,
And whenever we
never
look
is.
at these texts, like Sharon, you have a point, right? We're looking at the text thousands of years later through our own lenses. And it's hard to see it from the perspective of people at that time. We have the benefit of also knowing the impact that she's had on history and bringing us to where we are today. So there's so much here. I was really excited to bring Michal to this group so that we could talk a little bit about her. Is there anyone else who wanted to say anything to conclude our study for today?
What if she were he?
Well, then the story would have been entirely different. He would have
Entirely
become king.
Right, exactly. So
Well, if the story were reversed, you would never have something, I don't think, about where a man picks the wife and the wife is the queen.
right.
It never flipped the other way. The fact that she did what she did when she did it is, good for her.
Yeah. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead.
Also, continuing what Rabbi Catherine just said, you would never have a man taking on a woman's role. As Michal takes on a man's role, putting on the tefillin, you don't have men adopting women's roles back then, at least. That in the Bible that I can remember. I'm sort of fading out here.
Just to see one woman have her name over and over and over and over and over and over in a significant amount of times, I don't think there's much precedent for that. That's highly unusual. In the Torah and the Tanakh and anything.
Yeah, Sharon, go ahead.
I disagree. I think that The name is there over and over there. So is Haman's. I mean, it doesn't mean that she was wonderful. It means that she was notable, but not that she was wonderful.
She was
Yeah.
forceful enough to be in there all those times. That's what it's so rare that a woman's name is repeated over and over and over and over in a piece from anything in that time.
Yeah, she was impactful is the point.
Yeah, yes.
Right?
Good
And
way
that-
to put it.
And the Torah is filled with so many different stories of imperfect characters. And what is controversial and challenging and difficult at one time can set the stage for what is wonderful in the future, and vice versa, right? But for a woman to have a role that is so significant that she's brought up in this kind of way is unique to our tradition and is really, really important. It says that she made enough of an impact that the rabbis and everyone took note of her,
Right.
and that this was something worth passing on and studying for many generations to come. So thank you so much for being all a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
And there'll be study next week. What we might end up doing, just as an FYI, is my workload is a little bit unbalanced at the moment, just in terms of everything going on. And so we're trying to balance things a little bit more. So the cantor and I may actually start switching off a little bit with Torah study. So it's possible that he'll be teaching next week. And that might just be happening here or there. We'll give you a heads up on exactly what that looks like. But I just want you to know that change might be happening just so that, you know, I can be a human, essentially. So thank you
So
all
he
so
knows,
much.
he knows who he's dealing with then here?
He will soon. He's
Okay.
more than happy to do it. We've talked about it, and he's
Yes.
actually really excited about the idea. I wouldn't bring this up if he wasn't.
Right.
Okay, thank
I
you.
have I've studied Torah with Elon, and I tell you, he's wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be great for everyone. So just letting you know. Okay, good. Thank you so much.
Thank
I look
you.
forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. This is a
Bye.
hoot.